My name's Wendy Kalurgis, and I'm the president and CEO of the Greater Miami and the Beaches Hotel Association, and delighted to be with all of you today with our great partners at the Miami Lighthouse for the Blind and Visually Impaired. We've been working together for many years, and it's just so good to have, Virginia and I were just talking about that everything's back, and we're really just so happy to be together with this update of the website accessibility seminar. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our dear friend, our partner, Virginia Jacko, President and CEO of Miami Lighthouse for the Blind. Thank you, Virginia, for hosting this event for us today.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Beacon Council, for helping share this great event. We have participating either virtual or in person, people from academia, from government, from hospitality, and many other industries. And this is so important. I'm going to tell you a little story. You all know that the first debates about 2 years ago were held in Miami. I went to the website of each of those candidates. None of those websites were accessible. So I sent a letter to each of the candidates, and I told them that they were missing out on about 10 million people with low vision because they could not change the contrast nor the font size on their website. And we got about half of those candidates to consult with and let them know what it meant to have an accessible website. And on Inauguration Day, when the New York Times featured government.net, and the article had to do with the fact that the Biden administration, because of the services Miami Lighthouse provided them, had a widget on their website so the font size could be changed, the contrast could be changed, and that is good business because they would have lost out on voters if those candidates didn't change their website. And it is good business whether we're retail, hospitality, government, and it's the right thing to do. It's the law. And so I want to therefore talk about our first official expert on this, Mr. Robert Fine. He's been a practicing attorney for many years with Greenberg Treurig, and he chairs the ADA Accessibility Group nationally for Greenberg Treurig firm. And we've worked closely with him. So Robert, take it over. Thank you.
Next slide. Next slide. Good morning. This morning I'm talking about Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act and how it relates to places of public accommodation, for the most part today, hospitality, but places of public accommodation in general, and how your website can bring you opportunities, but also bring potential liability, and how you can avoid that. The Americans with Disabilities Act was passed by Congress in 1990, well before websites were really in common use. The part of the ADA that we're talking about today is Title III. Title III relates to places of public accommodation and commercial facilities, and prohibits discrimination against persons with disabilities, all forms of disabilities, in those accommodations provision of goods, services, privileges, and benefits offered. Places of public accommodation include hotels, restaurants, movie theaters, retail stores, concert halls, sports venues, schools, recreational facilities. Almost every business that you can think of that actively does business with the public generally falls in with the definition of public accommodation. Next slide, please. So places of public accommodation are covered by the ADA, and the goods and services are as well. And websites are considered to be part of the goods and services of places of public accommodations that are physically based, bricks and mortar places of public accommodations. There are also websites that are businesses in and of their own that have no real physical manifestation. Think about Amazon before it started having local fulfillment centers and businesses like that where you couldn't walk into a store. And we'll cover that in a little bit, but the courts in different parts of the country have treated those a little differently. But as a practical matter, virtually all federal and state courts in the country now have come down and held that websites, when they meet certain qualifying criteria, are covered by the ADA, either in and of themselves or because they're an extension of a place of public accommodation, a business that the website relates to. Now, one of the things that is being debated in the courts right now, which is relevant, are, as I just said, what do websites do for your business? And when websites are acting as your business, for example, if you have a hotel and people are booking hotel rooms, it's acting as an extension of your business. But there are also websites that are essentially just advertisement. If a business is a bar and they have a website, you don't go and order food to be delivered. There's no drinks. It just basically shows you what's happening on Tuesday night. You can't buy tickets. Generally speaking, those are not covered as part of the goods and services of a place of public accommodation. The analogy would be if you have a billboard down the highway from the bar and it's showing you the bar that's there and really nothing else, then that's not the goods and services of the bar. That said, people who are out there enforcing the ADA may mistake that for goods and service of the bar, and you may end up in legal difficulties anyways. So as a matter of course, as we'll go into, really anything you put out on the web, anything you're trying to communicate with the general public really should be accessible, because A, it expands the reach of people you're looking to contact on the web, and secondly, because it limits legal liability. Next slide. In the past few years, really going back to about 2006, when there was a lawsuit brought by the National Federation of the Blind against Target stores, there's been a huge flurry of litigation against businesses, places of public accommodation with websites over their websites. It's gone to the point now where there's over 10,000 lawsuits a year in federal court filed every year regarding websites. That doesn't include cases that are brought in state courts in states like California and some others to add to that number. And when you add those in, we don't really have a count, except that it's higher. So the fact that you have a business and a website makes you, as a practical matter, a target of this litigation. And really the one way to protect yourself from it is to have an accessible website. Next slide. So why so many lawsuits? Well, there are a couple reasons. There are advocates who represent groups of people with disabilities, advocates for persons who are blind. There are advocates for people who are deaf, who also are affected by inaccessible websites, depending on the issues with them. But there's also attorneys out there who team up with people and, excuse me, and file enforcement actions as what's referred to in the law as private attorney generals. And private attorney general concept in the law is that when Congress passes a law, they can give government agencies a bunch of money to try and go out and enforce it, or they can give those agencies a lot less money and make the law such that when people are aggrieved by violations of the law, that they can bring legal action and recover their attorney's fees. So they don't have to go out of pocket to do that. And by doing that, they get a much broader reach of enforcement of these laws. And the ADA is one of such laws. And so attorney's fees is certainly one of the big motivation for the attorneys who are bringing these cases. In the last several years, the cases which were brought in a lot of places in the country have really started to focus on being filed in California and New York, and a smaller number in a few other jurisdictions, because in California and New York, those lawsuits can be brought using the ADA and companion laws that allow for monetary damages. So if you have a business and a website, your legal and financial risk is higher. If you are a plaintiff doing enforcement, you've got a bigger stick, but you also have a greater financial incentive to bring legal action, as opposed to just first contacting a business and saying, we have an issue with your website. They just file lawsuits. Next slide, please. A good example of this is that Florida has historically been, since the beginning of the ADA, one of the real centers of ADA enforcement litigation, starting out dealing with lawsuits dealing with mobility impairment, parking lots, ramps, buildings, restrooms, things like that. And when the website lawsuits started, they really started heavily in Florida as well. New York and California have always been a higher than average location, but plaintiffs in those two states started figuring out that, looking at the Florida model, except that they could add on these state laws. So in Florida, if there's an ADA lawsuit, and in typical settlement terms, you may find that cases settle between, like it says on the slide, $5,000 and $10,000. Some could be less, some could be more. And in addition to that, there's an agreement to remedy deficiencies in the websites. But when you take that same case and you file it, say in California, California's Unruh Act, which companions with the ADA, first says a violation of the ADA is a violation of this law. So once you have an ADA violation, you've got the California violation, and a prevailing plaintiff there is entitled to treble actual damages, but no less than $4,000 per violation. So in terms of cost to a business, you take the Florida cost, which is basically attorney's fees for the plaintiff, and fixing your website or remediating it, and adding the monetary damages. And so now $5,000 and $10,000 lawsuits become $15,000 and $20,000 lawsuits, and sometimes even more. Another incentive to speed up your process to evaluate your websites and get them compliant. One of the ways, I'm sorry, next slide. One of the ways I look at this and speak to clients is that the internet and websites kind of like a glass of spilled milk. It goes everywhere. Next slide. And so when you have, and we have had cases where a small not-for-profit art museum in South Florida got sued in Pennsylvania for the website for its gift shop. We represented a silk flower manufacturer from Doral regarding its website in the Southern District of New York. We've represented New Orleans-based restaurant in California State Court over its website. So once you put your website and it goes live, and essentially you put it out into the ether, it's out there for anyone to connect to and grab. And sometimes there are defenses to deal with that, but often the legal costs of that greatly outweigh the cost to just settle the lawsuit and make them go away. So again, there's really no geographic protection these days because of the fact that, the internet takes, the good part is it takes your business everywhere. The bad part is it takes your business everywhere. Next slide, please. In representing clients, we often get asked, how long do we have to fix our websites, to make them compliant and do the things that we need to do? And, sometimes these questions come when clients already been sued and your time periods deal with coming to an agreement within the time periods allowed within the lawsuit, and then what plaintiffs will agree to. Many of our clients we work with, we deal with helping them get compliant before they're in litigation to hopefully avoid ever getting into litigation. And so the question again comes up, how much time do we have? And the real answer is you have up until one day before someone who wants to sue you goes to your website, because on the day your website's not compliant and a potential plaintiff goes to your website, they're thinking they have a potential claim. And so we have clients who, have had websites that when we see they remediated their website and we have a date and we get a complaint, and it was beforehand, somebody waited too long and they got very lucky. Most of the time, it's too late. And one of the things that's happened in the courts, there were arguments that if somebody was sued and they were negotiating or had a settlement, that a subsequent lawsuit had to get stayed. Basically, the court would freeze it until they finished doing everything under their settlement agreement. And if it complied, the first lawsuit would go away. The courts in the last couple of years, including the Haynes versus Hooters case from the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals that you see on the slide, have held that you don't get to ask the court for a stay. If you get a second lawsuit on your website, you have to defend that as though it were your first one, because the second person, it's a civil rights law. And each person, when they have a concern, it's their individual rights. And so the second person's, and the arguments of the case was, well, I went there, I couldn't use it, has nothing to do with the first person doing their, and if in fact, by the time you get to that second lawsuit, you've done enough work on your website that there's no longer a claim, you can defend it on that basis. But you don't get to make the lawsuit go away or say the fact that we have the prior lawsuit in and of itself as a defense. So as you'll be hearing about later, when we talk about technical aspects of accessible websites, the way to avoid the second and the third lawsuit is to have an accessible website. Adding on to that, and I think probably Bill will probably, or George will be talking about that later, is there are different ways you can make modifications to websites to make them accessible. Some of these are the old-fashioned way with get down and dirty, figuratively speaking, hard work going through the websites. And there are plugins and bots and programs that are less expensive, shortcuts, and very fast. And these have been proven to be not as complete solutions as doing it the old-fashioned way. And so, well, Robbie, come up here a second. Coming up here is Robbie Galbo. He's one of my team members in our National Defense Group, and we're talking about bots and artificial intelligence remedies.
Bots and artificial intelligence are kind of a hot topic right now in the website accessibility area. However, multiple large publications have come out and against these types of things. While they can provide some sort of accessibility, they really don't ultimately change the code of your website. Kind of one example is with what we call alt text. If a picture doesn't have alt text, then the screen reader is not going to convey what the picture is displaying to a sighted person. Right, as technology currently stands, there isn't any sort of bot that can fix that. Now, there are bots out there that can, for example, increase the font size and change the color contrast and those types of things, and they're somewhat useful for that. I have heard arguments made where the plugins that have been added to a website actually decreased the accessibility of the website. There are definitely people out there that hold that opinion, and I think that's it's almost universally accepted by now that there are some bots out there, particularly the cheaper ones. Now, that is definitely a cheaper way to evaluate the website, but I always recommend to my clients that you can never substitute the review of a website by a person who is blind, who has experience in accessible websites. And that's why we partner with the Miami Lighthouse for the Blind in large part, because their technology team, has the experience in this specific area, and B, because they're blind individuals, they access the internet and they know how a blind individual will use the internet. Even if I use a screen reader, I cannot replicate that experience as a blind person, as a sighted person, like a blind person would read the internet. So that's kind of my 2 cents on why I generally advocate against using just a plugin or a bot.
Thank you. So we were talking a few minutes ago about how courts in different places have had different views of what websites are subject to the ADA, and a little bit to talk about messy milk and why it may not make much of a difference. But it's talked about a lot and people have questions, so I'm going to take a minute and just go over this. Under the ADA, when the law came out, businesses that were subject to it were referred to as places of public accommodation. And the initial courts looking at that looked at the word places and said, that must have a physical, like a bricks and mortar manifestation. So a store that you walk in the doors, that cash registers and aisles and merchandise, physical manifestation. When, for those of you who are old enough to recall AOL, it could have everything that might be in the list of what public accommodations are, except it wasn't physical. And in those courts that looked at it would say It's not a place of public accommodation, so it's not covered by the ADA. Then several federal circuits looked at it a little differently and decided that, well, no, if you meet all the requirements for being a place of public accommodation, but you're not a physical place, the world has sort of, definitions change, and now there are places, virtual places. And so in the First Circuit Court of Appeals jurisdiction, for example, which is Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, what businesses that are website-based businesses that have no bricks and mortar presence, they are covered by the ADA. The Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in the Midwest, same thing. And the Second Circuit, which is of notable importance because that includes New York, where we've talked about having damages and the like. They haven't firmly held on it, but as a practical matter, the courts within the Second Circuit have all been issuing decisions in the last few years as though they're not requiring there to be a bricks and mortar manifestation of your business. And so pure website-based businesses are subject to liability there. And then again, going back to the spilled milk, you could be located 1,000 miles away with your business. Somebody in New York, if they pick up, your website online and want to do something on it and they can't, they can sue you in New York, or for that matter, California or Boston, and take advantage of those laws that don't require a physical presence. And in the case of New York, be able to sue for monetary damages. The reason I didn't mention California there on damages is that California is a little unusual in many contexts, but in this context, in the federal courts, they firmly hold that you have to have a bricks and mortar manifestation. But in California state courts, under state law, which is where their damages comes from, they do not require a physical manifestation. And again, in the world of law and something like this, the easiest place someone can file a lawsuit to get, for them, the best remedy, for the businesses, the greatest pain these days, and where we're seeing more and more cases being filed, California state court, whether the businesses are in California, Nevada, or Maine.
Yeah, and just one thing to add to that is the definition of a place of public accommodation under the ADA has been well litigated and well defined, whereas we're seeing under California state law, which is specifically the Nvda Act, and in New York State's human rights law, in New York City's human rights law, the definition of place of a public accommodation has now starting to get litigated more, and courts have come out with a more expanded definition of what constitutes a place of a public accommodation, whereas virtually almost any website conveying information could be considered a place of public accommodation, which makes it even more important for your website to be accessible to individuals with disabilities.
Thank you. So what does the ADA require of your website? What does it require you to do with your website? For many years, there was a rulemaking process going on in Washington by a federal agency called the U.S. Access Board. And the U.S. Access Board is a federal agency that is charged with writing accessibility standards for all the federal accessibility laws and all the federal agencies that, as part of what they do, need to have accessibility laws. So for the Department of Justice, it writes ADA standards, both Title III, public accommodations, and Title II, which deal with state and local governments. They write accessibility standards for the Department of Defense. They write them for HUD under the Architectural Barriers Act. And there's different variations of them. And they, for many years, were working on accessibility standards for websites under laws that weren't the ADA as well as the ADA. And one of the laws out there right now that in fact is a mature law in effect is called Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. And that has promulgated standards. However, that law, it applies only to federal agencies. It doesn't apply to federal contractors, federal agencies themselves. Now, there are businesses and entities who will incorporate those standards by contract. You can say, if I'm going to do business with you, you have to set up your information and communications technology. And by the way, that is a term that you'll be seeing in the future dealing with a lot of online and accessibility, ICT, information and communications technology. And so, and that's really what 508 deals with. So needs to be accessible, and there are accessibility standards. Those, at the same time, they were working on standards for Title III of the ADA. And about 4.5 years ago, there was a little political change that we're not talking about today, but it stopped essentially all federal rulemaking. And probably within a couple months of a rule being ready, dealing with standards for accessible websites and ICT, that rulemaking stopped. Now that there's a new administration, there's already discussions about the starting up of rulemaking in a number of aspects of the ADA, but including ICT and websites. And so hopefully we'll be seeing those standards for people who are advocates and in the disabled community. It helps speed up the progress. For people who are businesses, it gives you a standard to shoot for, design your products to, so that you know when you do something, you've got the protection of the law because the law has definitively said what it is. In the meantime, however, there's a model standard which forms the basis of most of those laws which don't relate to public accommodations, but for example, Section 508, and that's called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Some people refer to it as WCAG or WCAG, and the most current version is 2.1. And then there are 3 tiers of standards, and most common is middle standards. So if you were to say, what is generally speaking the appropriate standard to look at for my website, for my business, it would be WCAG 2.1 AA. Single A is the lowest standard, 3 A's is the highest standard. And to some extent, the things you add in the 3 A's for a lot of businesses are aspirational. But for day-to-day accessibility, and I'll let George and Bill talk about those when they speak their thoughts about the differences and what they recommend. And those are the standards that when you're working with accessible website consultants to both evaluate your website and talk about what you should be looking at. From our point of view as lawyers, we counsel you need to get something done, and we defend you if someone says you didn't. But the people who really can tell you for your particular needs what you need are people like Bill and George, who do this every day and have an advantage over many accessible web consultants in that not only they understand the standards and the programming behind it, but they are also the end consumer. They're individuals who are blind, so that when they look at a website, it's not that some machine said it works. They can say, we went on the website and we were able to shop and check out and buy like human beings do. And the way the ADA is written right now, the only standard in there, because we don't have that rulemaking, is that the website has to provide effective communication so people with disabilities, in this case, blind or impaired vision, are able to have an equal opportunity to use and benefit from the business or the website as everybody else. And so as we recommend consultants and process to our clients, one of the things we always recommend is that, and different clients, they're in different parts of the country, may have affinities with other groups. We always say, somebody on your team looking at your ICT should be someone who's vision impaired. And if you are going to be putting in things like embedded videos with conversations, somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing, because that's who you're putting it in for. And you're spending, good money to do it. You may as well, it works for the purpose you're doing it. So just in getting close to wrapping up, there's certain compliance pointers that I'm going to mention in passing, and I'm pretty sure that Bill and George, as they come in, are going to be discussing them. But one of the first things that they will counsel you and will counsel our clients is that your website should have an accessibility statement. And an accessibility statement is a statement that basically tells persons with disabilities that your website, you're working on making accessibility improvements to your website. If you've already made them, you can reference that. But accessibility improvements they're a living thing. Every time, if you take a website and today throw up magic fairy dust and poof, your website is accessible. As soon as somebody works on it tomorrow for 10 minutes, it may not be accessible anymore, because every change has an impact. And if it's not done using the proper vocabulary and techniques, you can go from accessible to not accessible very quickly. So you need to have a process for ongoing maintenance of your websites, which they'll talk about. With accessible websites, there's no do it once and you're done. So any plan really involves a plan of getting your website to a state of accessibility and then maintaining it. So often working with consultants like the Lighthouse involves not only getting in shape, but having them teach your web maintenance people and operating people how go to school. They need to learn new vocabulary, in some cases, and rules, so that they can maintain it, and then also have a process in place. So periodically, you can do machine checking for a lot, but every so often, depending on how complex your website is, we find it protects our clients the best to have human beings actually verify their website by using it, and those who are familiar with the concerns of the website. And so when you're dealing with, accessible for people who are blind, it should be people who are blind helping you do that. And I think we've covered a lot in a short period of time. We can do questions later, but I don't want to run out of time for Bill and George to show what they're going to show regarding accessible websites, because I think it's important for the business to understand what we're talking about in terms of changes being made to their websites. So, gentlemen.
Alrighty, thank you guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Robert and Robbie, for being here, for highlighting what you guys did and putting a backdrop on what we're going to be talking about here. Again, my name is Bill Rivera. I'm the senior technology person here at the Lighthouse, Director of Technology, and also Senior Accessibility Specialist. I also have my colleague, George Hernandez, with me, who is also going to be doing a demonstration after we finish the rest of these slides on what assistive technology can do on websites and what information somebody can gain from listening to that. So I'm going to start off a bit on website accessibility. It's think of it as this generation's wheelchair ramp. Before legislation a long time ago, we did not have the curb cuts on the sidewalks, or we did not have any ramps getting into buildings. So you had a set of steps. And if you were in a wheelchair, you were essentially out of luck trying to get at least onto a sidewalk, let alone trying to get into a building. So websites nowadays is that new ramp or these curb cuts. So like the physical curb cuts where anyone in a wheelchair can get through, but it's also designed universally for everyone else. So somebody pushing a cart or a trolley of some sort, or a baby stroller or luggage can easily get onto a sidewalk without having any issues. The same thing going in and out of airports and stores and what have you using ramps. Also, too, websites are an organization's front door to all the services and goods that are offered. So just like a physical store would allow you to purchase whatever offerings they have, well, same thing on a website. Everything nowadays is online and accessible. Well, we would want it to be accessible universally for everyone, but in the sense of accessible, meaning that anyone can get on there and purchase whatever the products are through the catalogs that are online. Website accessibility, as Robert and Robbie were talking about, also is the law. So websites have to be made to or configured for persons using assistive technology. Now, I'll identify and define what all that stuff's all about in a little bit. But lawsuits are skyrocketing in these last few years. Due to the pandemic, they've dropped a little bit, but they are starting to pick back up. Next slide, please. So who determines if a website is accessible? I'm sure you guys have thought about that. I mean, who makes that determination? So we'll talk a little bit about that. To web developers and web content people, are they the guys and gals that use the virtual hammers and nails, so to speak, to put together the websites and the content? Are they the ones that make this determination? Well, if they're trained in accessibility techniques, it helps, but not a lot of them are. Things are getting a little better at the university level classes and courses where some accessibility is being introduced in constructing websites and web content, but it's not 100% everywhere else. So you have a lot of these guys and gals that come out, and they're very good at putting together the websites and the web content, but ignore the accessibility side of it. So when somebody using specialized hardware and software comes along and they're using the website, they can't access it. So therefore they can't partake of the goods and services that are available. So they really don't determine whether a website is accessible. What about automated testing? These programs and bots that exist out there that will go through your website and they compare the elements on a page or different parts of the website, and then they make recommendations of what needs to be fixed, what's compliant, what's not compliant to the current standards, and what have you there. Well, a lot of these automated programs, since they use artificial intelligence, they're not going to always get it right, so to speak. So you're going to have false positives, a lot of false positives and a lot of false negatives. And that's where manual testing has to occur. So you're going to have somebody with the experience to go through that website and look through that report that was spit out by these bots and compare what the results are to the experience level of the person who's actually going through the website and testing it. So automated systems, they don't really determine whether a website is accessible or not. What about subject matter experts? What about the propeller heads, the guys and gals that know, that are trained in remediation techniques? Well, that helps a lot in the sense that they can come in and say, hey, look, this area of your site needs to be compliant. This area is not. This is what you need to focus on. You have varying levels of knowledge there. Some are very knowledgeable. Some are starting out. Some are in the middle of it. But they still don't determine whether the websites are fully accessible. What about the individual who uses the website? What about myself? What about Virginia? What about George? Or anybody with a visual disability or some other type of disability? Well, we're the ultimate persons that determine whether a website is accessible or not. Why? Because we're actually using it, and we're using it with specialized hardware and software. And if we can get in there onto the site and we could easily navigate it and do what we need to do on it like any sighted person would, then hey, it's pretty accessible. If we cannot do or partake of the goods and services, well, to us, it's not. So that is technically the individual is the one who really makes a determination whether the site is accessible or not. Now that comes with a little caveat. Persons who are very well skilled in using their access technology can get around things. They get little shortcuts here and there with the technology that can be able to access certain areas that may not be that accessible. But the average user, the general user, that's way more than, let's say, the experts that are using this stuff. If they can't get onto that website, hey, it's not accessible to them. Okay, so that's one of the caveats that come along with that. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the effects. What's affected? What are the sectors and industries that are usually affected by web accessibility? Well, essentially, just about everything. Anything that has a website out there that's selling a service or a product. The major one, obviously, is the hotel and hospitality industry. There's a lot of areas there on the websites that actually need to be looked at, especially the booking engine for booking a room, whether amenities of rooms have and they do display accessibility features, whether images and graphics are labeled on a website and so on and so forth. But also to the transportation industry as well. Airlines as well. We did a major one back a few years ago where we had to go through, that was a 6-month project, and we had to actually go through their whole system, including their booking and cancellation reservation systems. And it had to be done also in English and Spanish. So it was a large project, but that industry is affected as well. The health industry, of course, especially now with COVID, a lot of websites were for people to schedule their COVID shots. Believe it or not, a lot of them are not accessible to persons who really do need to get in there and get their COVID shots. So that's an issue, especially health apps, people checking themselves from home so they don't have to go to the doctor's office. Well, a lot of those apps have accessibility issues as well. What about the restaurant industry? Well, what about menus? I would love to go to, let's say, my favorite Italian restaurant and look up the menu online and sort of make a determination on what I want to have for dinner. If I can't access that menu or those portions of the website that allow me, let's say, to make an online reservation, well, then I'll have to look for another place to eat. So some other place that is accessible. So local, state, federal governments as well. Obviously, they talked about Section 508, which is related to accessibility as well. So they have to also have all their documentation, their PDF documents and websites accessible. The retail industry, of course, financial institutions, nonprofits, convention centers, even law firms as well have to be accessible for their clientele. Next slide, please. Going to talk a little bit about accessibility now. Okay, on social media, let's say Twitter, Facebook, and what have you, the word accessibility obviously is 13 letters long. So what they usually do is they take the first letter of accessibility, which is the A, and they take the last letter, which is a Y, and they put a number 11 in the middle of it. And then they'll throw a hashtag, let's say before it. So hashtag A11Y or @11Y. If you go to social media and do searches on that, you will find tons and tons and tons of tweets and comments and what have you out there on accessibility. So that's a good place to start if you're looking to see, well, what's going on out there in the world of accessibility. But basically, it just means access to electronic information, not just websites, but electronic documents as well. Excel documents, PDF documents, all types of what they call EPUB, electronic books. All of that needs to be accessible to persons who need to access that information. So why do these websites have to be accessible? It's obvious that it's going to include full inclusion to all persons with disabilities to use the goods and services. It also increases what they call search engine optimization. So it's just a fancy term of saying, hey, when somebody uses a search engine and they type in what they're looking for, chances are if your website is fairly to mostly accessible, it's going to pop up as one of the first few on the search results. Because of something that they call metadata, which is invisible to you guys, but in the background, it's the search engines use that to determine if a website is accessible. And a lot of that, once it's determined, it will pop that up onto the search engines. So very important for you to really consider that. Obviously, it increases business revenue because we have disposable income as well. So we're gonna want to partake of, let's say, staying at a favorite hotel. If I can get in there and access everything I need to on that webpage, including booking a room, making changes, canceling reservations, what have you. And I know that there's an accessibility policy there as well, that most likely that's the place I'm gonna be staying at. So it's very important that these things are really considered. It's also going to increase accessibility for everybody. So if a website's easy to navigate, easy to understand, easy to get around with for persons using specialized hardware and software, it's going to be easy for anybody on their cell phone, let's say, or on their laptop or on their tablet to access all this information. And of course, it is the law. So that's the other thing there. So let's switch over to the next slide, please. We're going to talk a little bit now about access technology or assistive technology. What's all that about? Well, basically, it's a product or service, some type of software or specialized hardware that allows somebody with a disability to extend their lack of functionality. So in my case, and in Virginia's case, and in Georgia's case, let's say we're looking at a visual disability. We're totally blind, so how do we access a computer? We would access it using a specialized program that speaks the information that's on the screen. They call it a screen reader. And you'll get a chance to experience a little bit about what that sounds like when George does his demo soon. So you got visual disabilities. That could be anywhere from partial sight all the way to total blindness. You also have mobility type disabilities, people that are using wheelchairs or maybe on crutches or some other type of, maybe it's a hand mobility issue. Maybe they only have use of one hand. You also have cognitive disabilities, and that could be head injuries. It could be any type of genetic issues that can cause that as well. So a lot of these type of disabilities or challenges are either permanent ones, they're either temporary or they're situational. I think we already know what the temporary ones would be. Let's say you break your arm or your leg. Obviously, you're temporarily disabled until you heal, and then you're fine after that. The situational would be, let's say you're trying to access your cell phone outside on a bright sunny day. So you're going to be temporarily visually impaired until you get a chance to get into an area where there's some shade, or you can mess around with some of the options on the phone to give you a little bit more contrast. So that's just a little example of what these type of issues can be. Next slide, please. All right, hopefully I'm following these slides correctly here. We're on should be on the auditing slide right now. Website accessibility auditing, what's all of that about? Well, that's where we would come in and we would use specialized hardware and software programs to actually go through a website. We usually have a general scope of review, but we also follow specific scope of review, which means that somebody may say to us, well, if we engage with you guys, we want you guys to focus specifically on, let's say, our retail engine portion of the website, and also look at or let's say it's a hotel, our booking and cancellation, look at our policies section, and make sure that the main page and maybe the next level down is fairly accessible. So it ranges from specific scope of work all the way to generalized overall review of the website. So what we do is we use manual methods. We use our specialized screen reading softwares. We use software that enhances or blows up the text on the screen and changes background and foreground coloring as well, just to see if the website can handle those type of changes. We use a program called JAWS for Windows, which stands for Job Access with Speech, and that's the one that you guys will be getting a little demo of soon, so you get a chance to see how that works and how that sounds like. We also use Nvda, which stands for Non-Visual Access Desktop Access. It's a free screen reading program that can be downloaded from the internet and tried out on websites. So we use that for testing as well. And we also use Fusion, which is a hybrid combination between speech and screen magnification as well to do the testing. We put together a detailed report with all the recommended remediation techniques in that report. We also do what we call a score sheet or a scorecard on accessibility, which we'll be seeing that soon in the next couple of slides, so you get a chance of what that looks like. And once all that is done and we do a verification report when the areas are remediated, there's a logo that comes along with that on the official report that can be also placed on the website that ensures that your website adheres to the highest standards of accessibility under the current guidelines, which Robert has mentioned, which is the World Content Website Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to be looking a bit at our scorecard, but our scorecard, what we've done was we've taken a lot of the criteria and just distilled it down into the 10 most common criteria that are generally found throughout websites. And what we did was we assigned a weighted scale to each of these criteria. So 4 being accessible, 1 being not accessible. And it is also copywritten by the Lighthouse, and it's also the intellectual property of the Lighthouse as well. Next slide, please. Now, up on this slide, you're going to see an example of what this accessibility scorecard looks like. You'll see that down in the first column, we have the 10 parameters listed, and then along each row, we have the number that's assigned after our extensive testing on that website. We also do have an average that's done on these parameters, so it averages out anywhere between a 1 all the way up to close to about a 4. Not sure which one now is up there. It's just a sample one that we put together, but it gives you an idea. Don't let it scare you a little bit, but just to pick on some of these parameters, it basically is a website easy to navigate using a screen reader or a screen enlargement program. So we'll have criteria that talk about that. Are graphics and images properly tagged or labeled so an assistive technology user knows what that image or graphic is when they're using a screen reader? Are forms easy to use? Can somebody input information into a form? Let's say credit card information, or maybe they're subscribing to a newsletter, or some sort of anything requiring input of information in a form. Are validation messages and confirmation messages easy to get to and easy to understand, easy to read using the assistive technology? Is there what they call a color contrast switcher on the website? Can somebody change the color or the background at least 1 or 2 steps up on the site to make it easier? So we also look at that. Our audio controls, play, pause controls, are they labeled properly? Can individuals easily access and find them and activate them? As well as with closed captions. Does it have closed captioning on the website as well for persons who are deaf as well? Can they get the information they need from those videos? And an important one, very important, is the accessibility statement, which is basically just some wording that gives the commitment to accessibility and a way for somebody to contact somebody on the website if they're having a problem trying to navigate or get through the site, both of being a phone number and an email address as well. Okay, so we're gonna go to the next slide over, please. Just make sure that I'm on the right. Okay, so, well, we've worked with at least over 150 website auditing clients. Now, I'm trying to remember if everyone got a packet of information that may have some of that outlined out. At least I thought that was probably was good. Oh, okay. Okay, good. So then, so there you'll be able to see exactly what we pretty much have worked on throughout the time we've been doing this. As Virginia had mentioned earlier, we worked on the presidential candidates' websites as well. When she had some problems trying to access their policies, she wanted us to take a look at these sites. We found, unfortunately, that none of them were accessible. So we had to get in communications with their chief information technology people. A few of them did respond to us. We did get in touch with them. We went through, reviewed some of their websites, got them up to accessible standards. Of course, one of the candidates became president recently, and we're happy to report that the whitehouse.gov website is now fully accessible because they ported over a lot of the changes that were done on the candidate's website over to that website. Next slide, please. So what are the effects now on the hospitality industry? Well, obviously, as we've been mentioning, there's a lot of disposable income that can be had for people that want to stay in certain hotels and resorts. And we're going to be staying in those places that have full accessibility, not only to the physical space environment, but also to the digital space environment as well. So some of the things that we need to look at here are, is it easy to navigate the main website? Is it easy to locate hotel information? Is it easy to book a room? Is it easy to make changes to that booking? Easy to cancel? Easy to reschedule? Are there videos that are easy to get to that talk about the establishment? And are they accessible? So those are just some areas to look at to make sure when ensuring that that website is inclusive for all individuals. So with that I believe ends my portion of the presentation. I'm going to be turning it over to George Hernandez, my colleague, who's now going to talk about a little bit about JAWS for Windows and give a demo on the website.
Good morning, everyone. My name is George Hernandez, Technology Manager at Miami Lighthouse for the Blind. I am part of the web audit team here. We are going to go over a couple of things on accessibility. We heard from our legal counsel. We heard from our technical aspect of it. And we're going to give you a demonstration of what an accessible and inaccessible web page will look like.
Blank. Title is meeting controls.
I'm actually right now using JAWS with speech. I'm going to slow down the speech so that way people can understand it a little bit better.
Alt control Windows down arrow.
Okay.
Alt control Windows down arrow.
Let me go back to the screen here.
Windows tab. Running applications list box. Post attendee -zoom -Windows tab. Post attendee -zoom shift Windows tab. Shift Windows tab. Link graphic zoom logo.
I can't get to my unaccessible web page. Great.
Alt shift tab. Accessible university demo site. Alt space context leaving menus.
This is a demonstration that we use most of the time to give when we do webinars like this or even presentations, because it gives us an idea or an overall idea of what an accessible and accessible web page will look like. If you look at it as a sighted person, the page looks pretty good. It looks like it has everything that we need to look at this university. Shows a display of courses that are available, the days. It gives you a little display of, looks like a carousel, has some text in Spanish, buttons, links. However, when you're using Access technology, the content itself changes completely. 99% of the time when a blind person is using a computer or a laptop and it's browsing the web, our commands are keyboard-based commands. That means we still can use the mouse and we still click, drag, and drop. However, all our commands are based on keyboard strokes. So if we're here right now, I'm going to go Control Home to go to the top of this page.
Top of file, blank.
And if I want to see what is on the screen, I can actually use my arrows down.
Context menu to navigate. Press new window Control +N. 2 of 19. Escape. Leave it unlabeled graphic to get list of 4 items. Link about. Link academics.
Let me slow down a little bit.
Alt control Windows down arrow.
Okay. So this, just using my arrows.
Link admissions. Link visitors. List end. Link AU student wins engineering award for talking robot sign language interpreter.
So I'm just getting information. Good engineer did a good job with his robot, but I don't want to be going down arrow through the entire page because this is a lengthy page. So let me see if there are any headings.
There are no headings on this page.
Oh, so how can I know what other sections are important here?
There are no headings on this page.
So now we're stuck here. So how am I going to be I'm going to have to keep on using my down arrow.
Welcome. Blank. Accessible university left parent AU right parent is a fictional university and this is its fictional home. Design problems that result in visitors with disabilities being unable to access the content or features of a web page. Although the heading of the
go line by line
of a section of the page suggests blank. Graphic horizontal line graphic.
Oh, graphic. I wonder what's there.
Bienvenido.
Bienvenido. So there is some text in Spanish. Okay, great. But I'm still using my arrows. I'm going to use another keystroke command I want to see if there are regions here so I can actually get to a section that I need to get to.
No regions were found on the page.
No regions. So again, I gotta keep on using my arrows. This can be a little concerning because how can I get information line by line? I'm gonna be here for a while just trying to obtain information. The sighted person can actually scan through the page, see what it is. They can scroll through the page, obtain the information and get out of it quickly. In our case, we still got to use our arrow and obtain information, auditorily.
Blank. Accessible university left parent UA right parent SUNA
So
university
it's like,
fictitious YSS super T.
no. What am I going to do now? Okay, great. I know there's some things here I need to look for. So let me see if there's something else that.
Table with 13 columns and
Okay,
5 rows.
great. I
Column
found
1,
a
row
table,
1.
so maybe
Blank.
this table can provide me some information that I'm looking for.
2007-08.
I hope that's not a phone number.
0.
So how can I get through this table?
Not in the table.
Oh, out of the
Click here,
table
visit
already.
link. To see a more accessible version of the same accessible university demo site dash and escape accessible university list of 4 items. Link about.
So I'm like, what happened here? Now I can't, just threw me out again.
List of 4 items.
So if I went to the side and now I go headings again, let me see what I can do.
There are no headings on this page.
Still no headings. So I'm stuck. I can't navigate this page. I'm not getting any information that I can register for a class in this university. Let me see if there are any graphics.
Horizontal line graphic.
Horizontal line graphic. Robbie and Robert touched upon this, especially with the alt text. There's got to be something in here.
Horizontal line graphic. Horizontal line graphic.
So literally this page, if I got to sit here a couple of more minutes, all I'm going to do is close the page and go somewhere else. And this is a problem that we constantly face when we browse the web. If we cannot obtain the information, either a hotel, Bill's favorite Italian restaurant, what are we going to do? We're going to find another place that page is accessible, and we're going to take our business there. In this case,
Accessible university demo site dash and accessible
we
version.
do have an accessible portion of it.
Links list dialog. Links list view. About 1 of the left. C. Click here. Click here. Tab. Move the link. Enter. Visited link.
I'm going to move
Visited link. Click here. To see a more accessible version of the same page.
to the more accessible web page,
Visited link. Click here.
and I'm going to go to the site.
Enter. Accessible university demo site dash. Escape. Virtual. Accessible university.
Now, this is the accessible part of it. I'm still going to be using my down arrows like I was before.
Blank. Heading level 1 graphic accessible university.
Heading level 1 right off the bat. That sounds good.
Main menu navigation region.
Here's a main menu. Oh, okay, so I'm hearing something now. They're using what they call ARIA regions or ARIA controls, the roles, which is accessible rich internet application elements.
Document regions dialog. Regions preview. Main
Here
menu
are my
navigation.
regions. Great. Now I can navigate
Main menu
quickly
navigation
through
1 of
this.
3. Main.
Here's the main region.
Apply now. Form.
Here's the form that I can apply for a class.
Main. Main menu navigation.
Okay, so at least I got some things. Great. So let's do this.
Escape.
I'm still going to use
Escape.
my arrows.
Show menu keyboard shortcuts button collapsed.
This was not there in the inaccessible web page. So what they did is they put a widget where I can see the keystrokes that I can use to make it more accessible to people with screen reading technologies.
Blank. About menu submenu collapsed menu.
About submenu, it's going to tell me it's expanding or collapsing depending if I want to get in here. I can just press the space bar.
Space menu news 1 of 4. To move through items, press up or down arrow.
And it said new. So it expanded this menu.
Escape about 1 of 4. News 1 of 4. Governance 2 of diversity 3 of 4.
This is the menu that I'm in.
News 1 of 4.
So if I click here, I'm going to click here, but it's going to take me to a section that's not feasible right now.
Enter. Leaving menus. Accessible university.
I can actually get to that menu that before was not displayed.
Accessible university generic landing page.
It's just a generic landing page. There's nothing here.
Graphic accessible main region. Heading level 1. There's nothing to see here.
There's nothing to see. So I'm just going to go back.
Back. Accessible
And
university
again,
demo
this
site.
is just a demo.
Blank.
Remember that robot?
G. Escape virtual PC robot with a friendly face assembled with various scraps of hardware and mounted on an old deck talk speech synthesizer graphic.
Nice text. So I know what it's already displaying to me. And it's telling me it's a robot. You know, remember that engineer? Good job, right? Well, guess what?
Previous slide button.
This is a carousel. Meaning, in the previous page, it was not accessible to me. But now,
Next slide button.
if I go next slide,
Space main region. Next slide button. Now showing slide 2 of 3.
it's telling me there's a second slide.
Blank. Show menu keyboard shortcuts button collapsed.
So if I go graphic again,
A large bronze tactile map with a speaker for audio output graphic.
it's giving me the text description of the graphic itself. If I go buttons again with the letter B,
Previous slide button. Next slide button. Space. Now showing slide 3 of 3.
now showing slide 3 of 3. So it's actually relaying information back to me saying, hey, you're controlling the slideshow. This carousel has 3 slides. So what's the next graphic in here?
Creative Commons license link graphic. Wrapping to top. Accessible University heading level 1. Braille dots embossed into the top of an aluminum beer can graphic.
So it's giving me the description of that text that's in there for that slide, for that graphic. Remember the headings? Here's headings, not a problem. Let's see what headings can we get.
Accessible University demo site dash accessible version. Accessible University heading level 1 graphic.
Here's our main heading level 1, which is the main section of the page.
Featured story slideshow heading level 2. Use JAWS key plus Alt plus R to read descriptive text.
So the slideshow, it's a heading and it says accessible slideshow because the way they did the ARIA role, they make sure that all the implementation of accessibility components are embedded into this slideshow.
Welcome heading level 2.
Here's the welcome. Remember the section that
Blank. Accessible University left parent AU right parent is a fictional university.
was talking in Spanish? Well, it's right below this, right?
Design problems that result in visitors with disabilities being unable to access the content or features of a web page. Although of this section blank.
Here's the Spanish section of it.
Heading level 2. Bienvenido.
Notice it's switched now to real Spanish, not quote unquote Spanglish. There is the language attribute that was embedded into the section and said, hey, if there's Spanish, French, German, any language that's accessible to my screen reader, make sure you translate it in the proper language. And here it is.
Heading level 2. Bien blank. Accesible universidad abre paréntesis u cierra paréntesis es una universidad ficticia y esta es su.
If this would not have been with the proper attribute, we would have heard that Spanglish version that we heard before. Any other buttons that are here or the forms.
Name colon left parent required right parent edit required invalid entry.
Remember, there's a form for registration, right?
Name colon left heading level 2 apply now.
Heading level 2. So the heading right above the form fields is labeled apply now.
Name colon left parent required right parent.
Notice it's saying name colon required. Previously, we didn't hear that. If it is required, it's masking, so I know it is a required field. I'm going to do my next keystroke.
Name colon left parent required right parent edit required invalid entry. Email colon left parent required right parent edit required invalid entry.
It's telling me the forms that are required to fill in.
City colon.
Notice in city, did it say required? No, it didn't.
Blank. Virtual PC cursor state slash province colon edit. Zip slash postal code colon edit.
So the ones that are required, and most likely it's because they want to get a hold of you somehow, they want to contact you, is your name and your email. City, state, zip, not a problem, not required.
Country colon. Blank edit.
Neither is the
Virtual
country
PC cursor.
code.
Group start desired major left parent as right parent colon.
Here's your desired major.
Group start desired major left parent as right parent colon. List of 6 items. Computer science checkbox not checked.
And again,
Space desired major left parent as right parent colon. Computer science checkbox checked. A clear check mark.
found the computer science. I know Bill and I are interested in computer science. So I checked it and it says, you checked computer science, and it actually echoed again or verbalized again the selection I created. So let's say I do want to submit.
B. Virtual PC cursor previous slide button. Next slide button. Slide 1 button. Slide 2. Slide 3 left parent submit button. Enter. Alert. Please fill out this field. Name colon left parent required right parent edit required.
Automatically, when I submitted the form and it gave me an error, it said, wait a minute, George, you didn't fill out your name. The focus returned back to the field where the name was not inputted. Automatically now, I can actually
Name colon left parent required right parent required invalid entry.
go ahead and
JORGE space HERADEZ.
type in my name.
Virtual PC
Go
cursor.
ahead, submit again.
Previous next slide 2 slide 3 submit button. Enter. Alert. Please fill out this field. Email colon left parent required right parent edit.
Forgot to put in my email. So as long as I am not filling out the required fields, it's going to bring me back to where I made that mistake of not putting in the required field. Put in my name in here, put my email.
JH required ERADEZ at MAAIMAILIGATAOSE period OR.
G.
Virtual PC cursor. Next slide 1 button. Slide 2 button. Slide 3 left submit button. Enter. Alert. Please fill out this field. Sunday, bird, Friday. Which of these is not a day? Edit required invalid entry. Add
So
error.
notice every time I make a mistake, it always comes back and puts me in a required field until I complete the form properly. Once this is completed properly, it's submitted, I should get a message saying your form has been submitted. We'll get back to you. We'll contact you as soon as possible. The other most important thing in here is, and
Virtual
this is
PC
where
cursor.
a lot of people have issues
Accessible
is
universe.
within the form fields. They just put in their first name, asterisk, field name. sometimes if you put the asterisk technologies like screen reading technologies or even sometimes magnification, it's very difficult to determine if that is a required field or not. If there is a masking within the text field that says this is a required field, it's so much easier with screen reading technologies to navigate it, or even screen magnification. Once you get to that field, you should be able to see that there as well.
Virtual PC cursor.
I'm going to go back again to the
Links
inaccessible
list dialog.
section
Links
of it,
list I inaccessible version. Enter.
so you can see the
Page 10 11
differences.
links. Visited link. Accessible university demo site. Virtual PC cursor. Submit button. Wrapping the top. Submit. Wrapping the top. Wrapping the top.
I
Submit
only have
button.
the submit button. What happened to the slideshow? I don't have previous or next. It's there though. Visually, you can see it. But my screen reader does not detect any button except that submit button that tells me you got to submit something. There are no headings, so
There
where
are
do
no
I know
headings
where
on
that
this
form
page.
field is? I can do certain commands to get to it.
Wrapping the top. Name colon edit. Email colon edit.
There it is. But is it telling me required field? No. How did I know there was a form there? I don't know until I start messing around with this page and running certain commands to make sure I can get to specific fields.
City colon edit. States zip slash post submit button. Enter submit button.
I just hit submit. How come the cursor did not refocus or redirect it to the focus field where I made a mistake? It just said submit. I'm still in a submit button.
Submit button. Enter. Enter. Enter.
I can press enter here all day long and it's still not going to take me to where I need to get to. There is no error message indicating, hey, George, you made a mistake. You need to come back up and fill this field in. It's required.
Creative Commons license link graphic. Wrapping the top. Horizontal line graphic.
Here's the horizontal line.
Table with 13 columns
Here's
and
the
5 rows.
table.
Column 1. Row 1. Wrapping the top. Table with submit button.
There are so many wrong elements in here. And something that council said earlier is the ICT is going to be something that we're going to be hearing more and more, is because this page right here, this demo, does not have any type of communication that I can actually obtain from. The communication process is not correctly set. My screen reader is saying, hey, you're doing everything possible within your commands to get me to certain parts. I just can't read it. There's nothing there for me to actually tell you what's going on.
There are no headings on this page.
No headings. How can I get to anywhere? Here, I do not have an
Links list dialog.
accessibility
Links list view.
statement, I
Creative Commons
believe.
license. End. Creative Commons
This is
attribution.
a demo.
University of Creative Cop. Click here. Click here. Click here. A used visitors. Admissions. Academic. About.
No, I thought I had put it in there. I thought I had tweaked it, but I didn't.
Escape.
I have it on my other slides,
Submit button.
on my other presentation. So this is just a brief example of how inaccessibility can actually hinder a person with screen reading technologies or even magnification to the process where I can obtain no information whatsoever to actually matriculate for a course in this university. And I'm going to end it here because I know we're running short on time. If there's any questions,
George,
yes,
can I ask you a question?
yes.
When you or Bill get a client, say, we've got a website we want you to look at and evaluate. And it's some business, you know, something's different. Are there, besides the URL, a set of questions, information that would be helpful for you to get with the URL when you get it? So that when you start into it, it can help expedite your getting familiar and getting into your review?
Like Bill stated earlier, sometimes we get a general scope and we have an idea of what to look for in that section. We've received also, sometimes we get an outline of the litigation itself that they need to focus on. And that's something that it is helpful. It's always helpful. The more information we get, the better it is for us, because that way we can focus and into detail of what that client is required. Yes.
It says, what is the typical timeline for a website audit?
George, you want to go to the front and answer?
Oh, sure. I have to get a mic. I think I muted myself.
No, it's unmuted.
Not muted? Okay. Yeah, 'cause it's not picking up. And the question is the typical timeline. It all depends on how large that page is. We've had pages that we've done in half a day, 6, 8 hours. We've had projects that's taken us 6 months. It all depends what content is on that page. It can be a simple mom and pop that maybe 4 or 5 pages. It could just take a couple of hours. Or it could be a health industry webpage, which is 3, 4, 5, 600 page websites, web pages all in once. That takes a long time to go through.
Yes. Oh, thank you.
George, for potential clients out there who are in regulated industries, like healthcare, like financial services, where there's different levels of security and maintaining the things you work with when you're in your websites. Are you guys deal with those, or the things you need to do or have in advance? So if a bank comes to you, for example, and wants you to work on their website, you know, financial services have certain security regulations, healthcare, price protection, or those things you work with, or you get those from the institutions themselves as to what you need to do?
Yes.
Yes, we do. If we're going to be working like in the scenario you're presenting, Robert, we always require a mock account that we can test. We request that from their IT side, and we work closely together with them. So that way we can test every aspect of that process. If we don't have that and we're limited just to the front end of it, then we're not doing our job. We want to make sure we get to the back end of it like any other customer will do in that bank. So that way we can see our statement, we can read our statement, we can transfer funds, we can write checks, we can pay bills, just like any other person will.
We also sign a confidentiality agreement with that engagement, like getting into patient portals.
Correct,
That would require a confidentiality agreement.
correct.
Thank you.
So much for tuning in to this critical event. Thank you. And my email address is V for Virginia. My last name, Jacko, Jacko. So VJACKO at Miami Lighthouse, one word, .org, O-R-G. bjacko@miamilighthouse.org. We welcome your questions. We welcome to have a follow-up. We welcome the opportunity to help serve you. Miami Lighthouse has been doing this for nearly a decade. I've been involved in this since distance learning became a critical entity back in the early 2000s. So it's the right thing to do. We're counting on people, not shutting out people with a disability. This is a time to be inclusive and have equity in terms of digital information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Virginia, and thank you to all the partners. This was amazing. Looking forward to continuing our great work together, and we really appreciate our partnership with you, Virginia, and everyone at Miami Lighthouse for the Blind.